Hi there everyone, it's Marcus here. This is the first lecture for our Futures 101 course. In it I'm going to walk you through a bunch of my thinking really, and a little bit of an experiment at times with ideas. I'm going to assume you know nothing much about futures at this point. Some of you will know quite a lot and some will know not much at all. So, and in the interest of equity, but also in the interest of sort of preparing the groundwork for what comes forward, I'm going to start off with the blank slate assumption. Of course, it's always a foolish assumption at one level, but bear with me, please, because it should be fun, regardless. So, what are my opening thoughts? Well, futures thinking, for me, okay, this is for me, allows us to explore futures we would wish for. Okay, so it's aspirational, yeah. Optimal futures, inclusive futures from which a better world is emerging. Oops, okay. It's based, this thing called futures thinking, on a set of powerful and yet simple tools that enables us to explore physical, social, economic, cultural, spiritual, and mysterious shifts that need to occur for our best futures to emerge. It is playful also, exciting and even elegant. But this does not mean it can't be clunky or challenging and even overwhelming. Sometimes it just does your head in. And that can be for the most experienced futurist as well as the beginner. Okay, but what's important to me at least is this understanding that what we are seeking to do is to provide access points from which we can perhaps craft alternative futures, to use that term, to those that we seem destined or doomed to experience. In other words, there is a dose of optimism and an increased sense of, I can do this, which we call in social sciences, we call it agency. Yes, we can do this. Okay? And the other thing, and this is why we're here in a group, of course, it's communal, and co-creative. We are not alone, as there is a bigger picture into which we can fit and into which we are always in dialogue, and I would probably add in brackets there as well, into which we are invited. We are always invited to enter into bigger and bigger spaces, and communion and being communal, being relational in other words, is something I think that is wired into the human DNA. We might withdraw into our apartments and houses and hide in our SUVs or wherever it is that we go to be on our own, because we are often overwhelmed sensorially, emotionally, sometimes physically as well, which I guess is sensorial at one level, but also the sensory is also to do with just the noise, the chaos, the complexity that is very much part of this modern world. So this communal stuff is being challenged by certain processes, certain, I would say, cultural and structural processes that are being imposed on us over the generations now, for multiple generations. And of course, we can see no end in sight, we might say, looking off into the future. But there is a groundswell, a growing groundswell of really interesting alternative ways of reading, experiencing, practicing a future's consciousness. Rewilding might be one. Another would be what's navigated, or what I try to lay out in my little book on neo-humanism, yearning and becoming. For me, the greatest expanse is not the cosmos out there, it's the cosmos within, actually, our own consciousness. Something about our own consciousness is mysterious. It's the sort of thing that Western philosophers have tried to plumb and map and understand for thousands of years, really. It's something that the ancient yogis, in their own way, philosophers of course, but from a different cultural perspective, were also trying to do. The ancient Chinese struggles with the meaning of life and trying to sort of navigate it and make sense of it as framed, let's say, in Confucianism, but also Taoism, and of course the Buddhism that spread from India to China and Southeast Asia, and of course taking the world by storm, mindfulness and all of that sort of stuff. These are all attempts to counteract the alienating aspects of our modern world. How cool. Okay, so to summarize my article on futures concepts and effects, we have these 13 bubbles, and I'm not going to read them all to you, but I want you to have a look at them, download it, print them out, and have a think about, the future is a principle of present action. The future can be studied. How? By its effects. So just like the history aspect of our world, the historical, there is no more ancient Roman legions, no Roman Senate, there's no Chinese armies or the Mongols, there are no more Japanese samurai in the traditional sense of the term, there are no more Maya or Inca, but they've left traces. Similarly, the future and our thinking and assumptions and images about the future leave traces on the present. What we choose to do, our attempts to secure a viable future for self, for family, for friends, for community, for planet, all shaped and determined by aspects of the future which we find in the present, because of course temporality is not linear. It is folded and woven together in the most beautiful and, for me, entrancing ways. Time, temporality, wonderful things to contemplate, quite baffling, but also really exciting. The future, all future work is partisan, okay? It is partisan. We don't future so that we can get a world that Donald Trump wants to live in. He's done his own futuring. He's living in his own world right now. So is Putin, so is Netanyahu. All these people are doing that kind of thing. But we're futuring because we want to develop a world, grow a world, foster a world, generate a world, underscore the values that mean it matters. The future, community, relationship, the natural world, the ecological, sublime. All of this, it matters. Matters to me. And I think you wouldn't be here if in some way it didn't matter to you. So we are partisan. We're doing this work for a reason. Okay? Jump, get down to number 13. Okay? Any useful idea about the future must at first appear to be ridiculous. A world of peace. That song from John Lennon, Imagine. If you take the lyrics seriously, you think, well, that was never going to happen. Nice bird. Okay? But we need to imagine. We need to imagine and we need to believe in things that seem totally beyond the realities that we inhabit. Can we imagine a world where we don't have toxic leaders like the ones that I just mentioned before? Can we imagine a world where truly human beings have this kind of incredible tolerance for difference, but also a deep sense of communion with the natural world, nature and culture, nature and what we do in our backyards, our gardens, are no longer at war? Can we imagine that sort of stuff? It's ridiculous. It's fantasy. It's the world that you might find in some lovely Studio Ghibli movie, but not this place that we inhabit. Well, we need to start thinking ridiculous thoughts. I really like that idea, and that idea comes from Jim Data, if I didn't say so before. All right, so I see these 13 points as my first principles, and they structure my reflections and practice and generate also an open and dynamic space for cultural evolution and social learning. So historically, today, we live in a period of waking up. That's from David Corton, okay, Joanna Macy, in which self-consciousness, that's the world within here, is no longer the privilege of a small elite. The future acts as an attractor. Those ridiculous features I was mentioning before in this process, and demands our attention in a way that it did not in pre-modernity, where the future was basically the same as today and yesterday, or quite likely if you're in the Christian West, we were just hanging around waiting for the second coming and Armageddon. So in this sense, the future has been a luxury of the affluent, okay? Yet it is becoming increasingly distributed. In other words, democratized, as I say at the heading. It's becoming open access, okay, for reflection and acting in ways that empower from the grassroots up. So, I want to now look at how do we tell our stories. John Lennon's song, Imagine, it is a story. It is a narrative line, okay, calling us into possible potential futures. And I really like this paper from Ivana Milojevic and Sahailin Ayatullah on narrative foresight. And this little section is worth reading in its entirety, okay? Because it really sums something up. And then I'm going to unpack it, okay? So, in terms of context, narrative foresight straddles the boundary between the empirical, that's the real, the interpretive, I wonder what you make of that, the critical, come on, who's winning and losing here? Action learning, modes of future studies. These are all elements of the futures, of approaches to futures that have been developed over the decades by both Ivana Milojevic and Sahailin Ayatullah. So it straddles those. It uses the forecasts of the empirical, but recasts them as possible stories. That is, unlike the empirical approach to future studies, which sees narratives qua data as accurate and precise descriptors of an objective reality, narrative foresight in the tradition of interpretive, critical, and post-structural futures, or future studies, sees reality as constantly negotiated by stakeholders. That's you and me, okay? It focuses on metaphors and myths within the interpretive. Like the critical, it challenges assumptions and interests, but does so to transform or enrich the worldview of the questioner. That's you and me, again. Okay? Not just to disrupt the categories of that which is being questioned. It does disrupt, but that's not the entire process. The thing is, it should transform. Action emerges from the deep questioning of data, meaning, worldview, and metaphor. Narrative foresight, as well, inquires into the implications of deep narratives and the relationship of the narratives held by the self and other. Deep narrative, this is the mythic and metaphoric, which of course both Milojevic and Ayatullah work with regularly, and it's something that I think that is absolutely central to thinking about creative and generative futures. So let's unpack it. So I've done this unpacking with a little paper on navigating the ruins of the future. Here I am. This is good old Angkor Wat. I love Angkor Wat. So if you've walked around ruins, you know they feel special, right? Now, in my own life, getting on now in years, there are all sorts of ruins behind me, relational ruins and so on. But also I've seen changes since the 1960s and 70s through to now. Okay, the world is not what it was. Oh no. But, as an historian, which of course is what I'm trained in and what I teach a lot of the time, I came across this wonderful paper by Guffelschuk called Dwelling Within the Inhabited Ruins of History. Now, that was in my back pocket from pretty much the time it appeared. I probably came across it in 2014 or 15. And, I've done a lot of dwelling with that piece because it's a really great read and really thoughtful. And some years after that, I came across this idea, ruins of the future. We're in ruins now. We inhabit ruins. That's part of his work. And those ruins actually extend into the future. And my thinking about that became narrative in the terms that we're doing futures work, which is intensely personal, intensely driven by a search or a quest for deeper meaning, new metaphoric and mythic roots and so on. Again, that shows up a lot in my book on neo-humanism. And then, of course, quite recently, I found an even older paper called The Ghosts of Place. And this looks also at the way in which human memory, individual and communal, generate connections with the past as ghosts. But of course, this has had me, and I haven't written another paper yet, but it has me thinking about, well, what about the ghosts of the future? If we're thinking intergenerationally, what about the children from 2200? What kind of world will they be being born into? Am I accountable to those ghosts? If I come from an indigenous culture, an Aboriginal culture, we're accountable to our ancestors. But I would also say, given their folded view of temporality and reality itself, we are also deeply responsible for and in constant connection with ghosts of the future. So this is me playing with those narratives, right? And, you can go and explore those as you like. This is me talking about Garfelschut's work from that paper on navigating the ruins of the future, where I say, this guy offers us something here. He notes that ruins hold promise, and that's what I point to in my little paper. The layered nature of the ruin, to quote, allows several dimensions of reality to partially collapse, one falling into the other, disarticulating their previously sharply drawn lines of demarcation. They fold in, as I said earlier. The space that enables the emergence of this kind of phenomenon is the highest amplitude, in its highest amplitude, is precisely the inhabited ruin. And I think we need to play with that metaphor as one of many metaphors, but I think it really holds promise for our creative thinking as futurists. Add to this observation the understanding that the ruins we inhabit, past, present, and future, are all the product of what Theophilus Ruiz, a fabulous historian, calls the terror of history. It's a little book, well worth getting. In his reading, humanity creates culture in response to a deep sense of aloneness in the universe. Culture is like a coral, that's my analogy, not his, that secretes manifestations of power, purpose, process, which it deposits as ruins. So we have culture all around us. We live in culture like a fish lives in water. Our culture has some incredibly wonderful, precious offerings, but our culture, all cultures, are really dirty. Racism, colonialism, paternalism, patriarchy, all of these kinds of things are all part of our culture. They're part of the ruins that we inhabit now. Some ruins need to be demolished, whereas other ruins need to be celebrated and moved into. We move into the future, taking elements of our past into the future with us that are sustaining. I think that's worth thinking about. So where do we go? Lovely picture of ruins of the future, linked to the article again. That's just to capture that kind of the darkness of the present moment, acknowledging, this could be Gaza with Israel over there, couldn't it? Acknowledging that the world we live in is heavy with the burden of the ruins of the past. But what do we want to do with a world like this? Well, that's the question that a course like this at least seeks to start to address and engage with. So we have, going from my list of 13 points earlier on, open and closed futures. And the question that I want to ask here, I'm not going to answer it because answers are boring. Whose future are we living in? How much choice do I actually feel or I have in this world that we currently inhabit, that you currently inhabit? This is a question for you. Whose future? Are we living in a future that was basically laid out by our partner or our parents and grandparents, or are we living in a future that was laid out by Australian politicians, oh God forbid, or are we living in a future that we really have hands-on, gone and fully embraced and generated for ourselves? knowing, of course, that nothing is ever perfect, that we are always in negotiation with the systems and structures that we inhabit. My future potential internally is possibly limitless, but externally we have a body, we have constraints, we have the economics of the kind of world that we live in and the structures, we have laws, we have a whole bunch of things that might constrain us. So we're always in that interesting negotiation. Okay, so we're looking for alternatives, and to me, alternatives actually mean freedom. Futurist thinking offers us a mix of anticipatory critique, right? Strategic orientation and imaginative process. It brings these things together. It says, okay, we can imagine a future like that. Let's run a scenario. Let's look at how we might achieve some of those things. What needs to happen between now and then? So we start laying out strategic routes and we start imagining the kinds of things that we might need to do. The goal, of course, is to free us, even a little, from the tyranny of the present. That's an idea that I took many years ago from Michel Foucault, who talked about critique as that which frees us a little bit from being governed. Okay, we're governed a little less. And I've kind of grown with it and twisted it and molded it in my own way over the years. But it's a terrific idea that the goal is to free us a little bit more from the tyranny of the present. It is designed to help us see this world as remarkable. There's nothing given or stable about the world we inhabit. And in fact, it should surprise us, and that, I think, is something that we get lulled into a false sense of, this is what the world's like, okay? But the world ain't like this. If you go to live in America, Brazil, India, China, Taiwan, Japan, over into Europe, every single nation has its own world. Within each nation, there's the various components. There's no one hegemonic France, no one hegemonic China, no one hegemonic India. In India, they've got millions and millions of people speaking different languages, okay? And those languages are not Hindi, they're not in English, they're Tamil or they're Oriya or they're Bengali, whatever it might be, millions of people. Each one with a language, of course, creates their own realities too, their own histories, their own myths, their own aspirations. And of course, there might be a layer of Indianness laid over those different states in India, but I can tell you there's a very strong regional identity involved in all of them. So let's take thinking for a moment. I want you to grab a pen and paper and to scribble down a few responses to these. So think of an issue. It could be Gaza, it could be the economy, it could be climate change, it could be, the aftermath of Black Lives Matters, or it could be just something very personal like your own desire to go on a trip somewhere. What do you hear about that in the news and the media? So this is the litany level. We're playing with Sahel and our tool is causal layered analysis here. So the first level is to think about litany, and we're going to go through this quite closely in the following slides here. I'm just going to move that over there somewhere. Okay, so make a short list, and you should pause this while you're doing that. Stop, pause, and then once you've got a few things there, come up with what do we look to in order to fix or blame or address this matter. So if it's I want to travel somewhere, and I've been hearing that one of the great places in the media is to go to Peru. Okay, so you've heard about Peru, you go and do a little bit of Googling on it, you read the Wikipedia article, and there's some blah, blah, blah. You know that it has serious issues around the environment. There are struggles about blah, blah, blah. Then you go, okay, what do we look to in order to fix it or blame or to address this matter? Well, you're going to check the safety rating for Peru on the Australian Bureau of, what's it called? Not Defence, it's the Foreign Affairs, sorry, SLAP. Okay, and they have a rating for all these countries. Or it says Peru's a yellow, an orange or something, and that means you go there at your own risk. And then you go, okay, what assumptions about the world? The assumptions are that my nation state's going to look after me. We know that because every time anything bad happens in the world, our newspapers immediately say, there was one Australian involved, or there were no Australians involved, so who gives a hoot? Okay, that sort of thing. So we know that the nation state might look after us. It's a bit like that Australian soldier who got captured by the Russians. We thought he was a goner, and then he turns up again. So the worldview, though, is an assumption about how do we feel and understand security, for instance, if you're traveling to Peru, and so on. So, yeah, I hope you've been pausing as you go through this, not just following my thing, or maybe you're going to pause it at the end of number 4 or go back and do them all, which would make perfect sense. Is there a story, a metaphor, or a myth that you can link to this, an anchor that sums it up somehow? Well, you might have read a travel log. Maybe you've read Motorcycle Diaries by Che Guevara. Okay, you're a Che fan, so you've read Motorcycle Diaries, and you have this kind of fantasy about motorcycling through Peru. So you've got a myth, a story, because Che Guevara was very good at writing his own myth up, and so on, and you fuse your myth with that other story. Okay? There are myths behind all stories, metaphors. They might be deep or they might be shallow. Some are really obvious. Let's say the good and bad in the Harry Potter stories or the Tolkien story of the Lord of the Rings, where there are clear good guys, clear bad guys, and so on. Other stories are much more complex. If you're reading a Maya Angelou story, it requires a different set of, what would I call it, judgments and analytical tools to make sense of those stories. But they're still great, very powerful human stories. So we're starting off with that, but I want to now move on. You can keep playing with that and see where you go. I want to move on to this lovely little thing that I've found by Hao Wang, who it's been on Medium for a couple of years now, a number of years. What is it? 2023. There you go. And he gives this lovely overview of CLA. So just giving you it here so you can, again, print it out or whatever. I've got to move my picture. I'll move it over here somewhere. Okay, so we've got this. What's the situation? That's litany, okay? The obvious problem, the phenomena, the trend, the issue. Something triggers a reaction of helplessness. Okay, what can I do, he says, or apathy. Nothing I can do about that. If you go back to this, what do you hear about it in the news media? We hear about a whole bunch of stuff, and we're thinking, well, what's happening in Ukraine or Gaza is appalling, but what can we do about it, right? We get that kind of overwhelm. What systems sustain this situation? So how do existing structures, policies, and mechanisms maintain this? One of the key issues, I've mentioned Gaza, is, of course, this weird creation of the nation state that we have. That's a system that means, we can't go and involve ourselves in the dirty business of Israel and the Palestinians. That's between them and them. Similar sort of issue also with Ukraine and Russia, for instance, okay? And of course, there's a lot of saber rattling now across the Pacific with the Trumpian sorts of approaches to foreign affairs and diplomacy, which seem to involve a lot of strutting, right? But there are structures that maintain these things. What cultures support these? The complex ideas and assumptions that give legitimacy to policy level, for instance. Okay, and so policy reflects, the dominant policy will always reflect assumptions about reality. So the policies that we see being argued about in Australia right now, where let's say our noble Prime Minister Albanese, he's having to be dragged screaming, apparently, according to the news, to a policy flip, a backflip, and so on. Because, of course, backflips are just what the opposition love to point to and go, he, look at them, vote for us next time, type thing. And beneath all of those sorts of things, we have what initiative, voice, emotional experience behind the culture. I think emotion is really what is captured within a metaphor. Metaphors are emotional pills or emotional jewels that hold that energy and go, and they're releasing this into the world. One of the things that I talk about in my little book on neo-humanism is future's pheromones, that the future has pheromones and it tracks us. just like pheromones attract us to another beautiful human being or whatever it might be. But we pick up fear, anxiety as well. These are all pheromonal as well. These myths and metaphors are underlying beliefs that are captured not rationally in a philosophy like, let's say, neoliberalism or Marxism or some ideological perspective like humanism. No. We can say here there is something else that's happening, and it's at that level of emotion. It's the emotional energy that runs into the worldview that then generates the policy, that generates the effects at the litany level. Now, if you're running a workshop, whole one goes on, he points out that you work your way down through a CLA, and then you can work your way up to an alternative litany, okay, a future litany. So we have we say, okay, we've already been doing it because I've been talking our way through it. You know, you want to go to Peru, you look it up, you look at the Australian Foreign Affairs, you find out that it's a bit risky, then your own worldviews about security and insecurity come in, and then you go to Che Guevara and his myth metaphor there. He's on his motorcycle chuffing around South America, having a blast and being deeply politicized. Then you move across, and you know, if you were with a group of people in a room and they've gone through this and they've spent an hour and a half unpacking their context, it might be a business context, a community context, whatever it is, and they've come up with this metaphor, Che Guevara on his motorcycle. What's an alternative myth? A myth that might generate a different approach to your trip to Peru. What might it be? Think for a moment. I'm happy to think because I didn't really think about my myth metaphor before I got here. So it might be it might be not on a motorcycle as a kind of rich Westerner traveling through impoverished Peru. It might be that you hire a llama and you hop on a llama. The llama with those beautiful Peruvian blankets, and you get a poncho and you go native. And the worldview will be immerse myself, swim through the culture of another people, not as a privileged elite observer, but as someone who actually goes and you spend 2 years working in on a farm in the foothills of those mountains there. And you do a few great things in the meantime, along with, you know, going up to Machu Picchu or whatever. You get your Spanish going pretty well, and then as you experiencing working up to the systemic level, what's happening there? Well, you don't have to worry about the Australian Bureau of Foreign Affairs, right? You're in a living ecosystem of relationships that you've generated, and your litany will be postcards home to mum and dad saying, "I'm fine, mum and dad, don't worry about me," and you know, I'm growing pawpaws with a bunch of these villagers, and we have a lot of fun at night where they're teaching me how to dance and I'm teaching them how to play guitar or something like that. Okay, so you go down and you come up and you get a different future. I think that's a wonderful process. It's something that Saham and Ayatollah and his gang do a lot of in their workshops, and it's a really exciting process. Okay, now the third thing that he touches on, Ho Wang touches on, is he picks up on Joe Boris's futures cone, and he gives us a very nice example of it here. So we've got different futures. We've got the possible, the plausible, the preferred, and the probable. Okay, and somebody, I forget who it was now, has also added to this thing the preposterous. That's the Jim Data type ridiculous. Okay, and we've got on a temporal axis coming out here, and each one is linked to various value assumptions. I just thought I'd throw that in there because I think the futures cone is something that's worth exploring. It gets a lot of attention because it snappily captures the fact that, you know, if we go on a narrow beam, the probable future is that Trump will turn the world upside down, Netanyahu will get away with all the genocides in Gaza, and the bad guys win and the poor guys lose. You know, it's the regular story, right? What would we prefer? I think you and I could prefer a whole bunch of non-militaristic, non-violent, and co-creative solutions. What's plausible? Well, that is kind of plausible. We can imagine a two-state solution to Gaza and so on. Is it possible? Well, given the geopolitical pressures on the actors there, and there's, it might seem improbable, okay, going back to there. But, if we start generating scenarios around that, we can come up with, some potential interventions. I'll stop there. I just wanted to bring that in because I think it's a very nice representation of that futures cone. It's very likely we will meet the futures cone again, as we will CLA in this course. So, using scenario archetypes like those of Jim Data, business as usual, the collapse, disciplined world, and transformation, we can generate different kinds of narratives. So we're going back now to narrative, okay? Let's think about narratives again, because narratives are powerful tools, as Milojevic and Ayatollah remind us in their paper. Here it's captured in a lovely little graphic which has been, as they say, adapted from Jim Data, 1979. If you hold the cursor over it, oh, there it is. Sorry, I thought I'd put the link in the image, but I didn't. I put it over here. There's the link to this and an explanation of the scenario archetypes. Well, an archetype is basically it's a metaphor for how things work, okay? The scenario is the telling of a future story based on certain data that was talked about by, again, Ivana Milojevic and Sahan Ayatollah in their quote. And we take that data, we take our aspirations, we take interpretive stuff on the sociological, the political, the economic, we put it all together and we come up with different stories. Business as usual is, go back one, the probable, this is business as usual, we just keep on doing what we do, okay? The collapse one is also quite probable. It's plausible and it's possible. That's where the economy or whatever collapses, or we'll end up with a third world war or whatever. We just go down the tubes as the most apocalyptic environmental scenarios and economic scenarios throw at us. A disciplined world, which I'm going to touch on a bit more in a moment, is the world where you go back again, oops, wrong way, you come here to the plausible. That's where our governments all stop us from driving cars. They ban cars. They tell us we have to stay within, 200-kilometre radius of our home, and we become agricultural peasant types again, or whatever it might be. Or maybe we become technologically sophisticated and embedded in an environment, but we have very strong inner and external systems that control our behaviours so that we quickly cease to exploit and to ravage our planet in the way that we're doing in modern industrial society. And of course, there's transformation. Okay, transformation is where that suddenly, for whatever reason, we come up with some technology or find some new energy, which allows us to live in harmony with the world as it is, with all the koalas and kangaroos and everything else, and at the same time not go backwards in terms of quality of life and also our aspirations for how life should be and how our futures should be. Captured here in these beautiful, there's transformation going up in the red, there's continuation, the business as usual, which hits a point. There's a tipping point, TP, tipping point. Limits and decline, we hit limits to growth, Meadows and Co. from Club of Rome, and then we start going down, and that's decline and collapse. So that's one way to look at it. Now, I'm a great believer in the narrative, right? So here we have a multi-author book, Eco-Fascism. That one is a link to the site where you can download the entire book, pretty pictures and all, for your edification. It's got lots of authors in there, one of whom is me, another one is Sahal and Ayatollah, and essentially we were asked to write a very short story, no more than 1,000 words, more like 600, 700, 800 words long, most of these stories, in which we were told an eco-fascist world had arisen. And that world had put a limit on, let's say, everybody had to be vegetarian. You weren't allowed to drive cars and all sorts of stuff. So we were given that as our hook, okay? And we were invited to write into that. So in other words, the narratives of the eco-fascists allowed us to hack current conditions, imagining, and it's published by One Day in 2050. So it's imagining a world 25 years out from now, only 25 years, that's relatively short term, in which something has happened that led very quickly to an absolute turnaround in our economic, political, cultural value system. All right? Great stories, some of them very depressing and tough, some of them kind of more, I guess, solar punkish, and so on. Mine is actually quite historical, but I'm not going to give it away. I'll let you go and find out. But I think that's really important to notice. That there are projects like that eco-fascist book that are out there happening right now, and which narrative is being used to destabilize our assumptions. Take a breath. So, the comfort of the familiar is something that business as usual, ties us to. We all would like to keep driving our SUVs or living in this lovely wonderland of Australia, because it is wonderful. We are very privileged in this country. But, not everybody is equally privileged, hey? So, fish in water, right? So, we don't see our own culture, we don't see our own world. We don't know what we don't know either. So I've got that picture there of an African classroom in which the kids are all lined up in white, and they are all clearly obeying the teacher up the front, doing whatever it is that they wanted. This is an industrial picture of education, one which I think is really quite toxic. It teaches people to be passive, it suppresses creativity, elevates conformity to a virtue. Okay, there's nothing wrong with conformity, but I think a bit of oddballness, in my t-shirts, whatever it might be, is welcome, right? Tools, of course, are something that futures studies use a lot, and we have a lot of tools to explore in this course. Tools release our imagination and open up alternative. Already said, so I don't need to go into that. But I think it would be fun to think of yourselves, if you're entering this course in this space, and maybe you've been this for quite some time already. I think it's important to understand that we have the, I would say, or duty actually, to be imagination activists. We need to be out there living lives that are rewarding, but also disruptive, okay? Disruptive of assumptions. You have to be like this. Men have to be like this. Women have to be like this. White folk, should be privileged or whatever. I really don't know, but that sort of stuff. That the modern schooling system, the education, we can't have anything better. Literacy is about being able to read a shopping list or an escapist novel, how to fix your computer book or something like that. But it's not about cultural and future literacy, which disturbs the dominant assumptions. One of the things that we do in future studies is we become highly literate and highly sensitive to power play, to the underlying seditious methods that the dominant state of play, that means the wealthy, the oligarchs who control our politics and our economy, that they wish us to take on. So that's what it's about. There's a different kind of literacy here at work. So if we're thinking futures and we're thinking archetypes, then we should think of typologies. There are pop futurists who like to sell great flashy ideas, the mega trends, and you got to watch out for AI, it's going to do this and that. There are empiricist futures. They're the people who take data and crunch it to demonstrate, yes, the aging population is going to totally overwhelm youth in 2 decades from now. There's the interpretive futurists. Okay, that's another whole zone. They are people who look at social processes, bring together things like sociological thinking and so on to understand, often psychology as well, to understand the lived conditions of people and therefore how futures emerges from those conditions. It's also to do with media and so on. There are critical futurists, which is well, pretty much where I started off, really, looking at critical theory, critical spirituality, which I touch on in my Neo-Humanist book, as ways of disrupting dominant assumptions about the real. That's me and Foucault. You know, Foucault said critique is about being less governed. I turned it into critique is about becoming freer, but it is about being able to create a space in which you've got some room to move and think. Then there's the action learning approach, which is that kind of process that the CLA down and up process is an action learning approach. And it's iterative. You go down and down and you go round and round, and you get more and more sophisticated at doing things. And then we land in the transformative, okay? The transformative is another typology. It's one where we're really seeking to use future studies to transform the experiences of us, our communities, and so on. On the other side is that list from Sahel and Ayatollah, which he talks about in his 6 pillages, business as usual. There are used futures, there is the disowned future, the alternatives, okay? There are colonized futures, and there is collapse and transformation. So they are sort of scenarios, but they are also ways of describing the kind of future that third world developing countries want. Is they want the future that gives us Los Angeles, San Francisco, Sydney, Melbourne, and so on. That's a used future because we who have those things know that they are actually dead ends. A disowned future is the future where we don't want to actually look at elements of that future that are ugly. For instance, continued racist treatment of Indigenous people in Australia. That's a subtext within our dominant political systems, okay? It might lead to, degraded futures for generations on for Indigenous Australians. And while they are suffering, we in our elite comfort zone are equally wounded. It's just that we don't suffer from, let's say, physical want and the same level of domestic violence or loss of purpose, okay? It's really important to understand that. So heading towards the end here, a few more slides. Basically, I'm going to whip us through a few of the tools that are available to us now. And we will play with some of these. So the 3 horizons is a great one. The Horizon 1, okay, where we look at what's coming up right now. Well, we've got 4 years of Trump ahead of us, Horizon 1. Now, what's happening? Well, there are powerful grassroots often, but also national movements that are resisting the Trump-type vision of the world. Further down, the horizon number 3, it's somewhere out there, maybe 30, 40, 50 years from now, okay, where we are looking towards transformative things. What are the signs now? AI might be one of those signs. Certainly, what I'm seeing is the groundswell in Indigenous consciousness, the rewilding movements, and so on. I think there's a lot of promise in those movements and in the intellectual and theoretical work that accompanies them. That can't ever be discounted. That's the word. So we can do emergent issues analysis. That's where we start. We do desktop searches and so on to see what are the hot spots that are just starting to appear that might be going to overturn dominant assumptions rapidly. That's the blue one particularly, or the green in the 3 horizons. And of course we've got the 3 horizons. Scenarios, let's come back to them. Storytelling. The narrative impulse, as I call it there. I've got to bring this over here, drag that somewhere else, and put it down here. Okay, so I would say, well, I do say, cultures are story machines. They live and breathe stories. Without the story, we are no more than, amoeba, really. I'm sure they probably have stories too, but they wouldn't interest us very much. I want to make this point. The scenario process enables participants to see narrative as a process. It's something we generate. Again, it's like that pheromonal stuff. It can also enable participants to identify their current narrative context. I'm in a patriarchal, white, comfortable, middle-class world. Not very exciting, but it's secure. In this way, scenarios help us distance ourselves from the dominant script and see the world with new eyes. What happens if I chose to go to Peru, like I was playing around with before? If I chose to go and live in Peru, it might be very interesting. It would challenge some of my security needs, but it would also be an adventure. All right? So that's where scenarios are working. And they work what? Well, they work to release our imaginations. I love that image. Let's hide me down there now. Gosh. All right, what's happening? So the imagination is a great human asset, but it is shackled to tradition, all right, context and habit. We can't imagine the things that we have not experienced in our own culture, okay? We can't imagine beyond the what is at some level. But we have a lot of elements in our culture, traditions, memories, echoes of the past and possibilities that we can revitalize. That's what I call creative traditionalism, where we turn to our context, our traditions, the past and the present, of course, because they're alive in the present, and we cherry pick them. That concept of rewilding, which I've mentioned a few times, that's an interesting one. The wild out there. That which used to create so much fear in human beings. We're now wanting to invite it back in. Well, some people are. I like the idea. I'd happily invite the wild back in. I had a big spider sitting up there the other day. Anticipatory imagination. Then what kind of imagination are we after? I'm talking about imagination activists, right? Just earlier. Anticipatory imagination plays with context to explore what is in plain view but hidden. In other words, it reveals new things, remarkable things in a world that we have seen as flat and boring because we're conditioned to it. We are the fish in our water. We inhabit what Yuval Harari calls imagined orders, but they are imagined orders. The world of Australia 2025 doesn't have to be this way. It could be a lot worse, but it could be a lot better. Futures thinking grows out of collective intelligence, okay? In the room. It's communal, it's co-creative. It's committed to optimal, that's why we're partisan, futures or outcomes for all. It offers pathways, actions in other words, to be taken to achieve futures we desire. We must not get caught up in the abstract without constantly road testing it in the present, okay? So, method and madness, we want to be birds escaping from the cage, right? We're not looking for answers, but for insight. Okay, I'm going to move myself again from here. Throw myself up here now with the pigeon. An informed direction and a sense of agency. I can do this. We can do this together. The present is now remarkable. Optimism grows when we get a sense of our own ability to act. Okay. We have some fun as well. What resources do we have to escape the cage to imagine these orders? Well, we've got a bunch of futures tools. We've got a futures consciousness that's emergent and growing. So the invitation is there in a course like this to think about our human futures, and now also involves the planetary. So we cannot be species-centric or anthropocentric. We need to be planetary-centric, Gaia-centric. Planetary futures involves all that makes us who we are. Okay, there's our inner world. That's the sort of stuff I talk about in neo-humanism book. Microbes and elephants, oceans and stars, galaxies and photons. They're all there. Okay, and the last slide, just to play around a little bit. Resources. There's a great website called the Long Time Project. The Long Time Project is focused on finding new ways to help us care about the long-term future. Okay, they don't use the plural there, but that's okay. I forgive them. But they are very much futures-oriented. Okay, there's that. There's a great book from Roman Krishnarik, who's an Australian philosopher living in London, called The Good Ancestor. And there's my own website, which is a bit out of date. I'm getting it updated, but I take so long to do these things. Who knows when it will be done. But I want to thank you. Hopefully this was a useful introduction to what we're going to be covering in this course. And we will have a get-together where we run let's say, a CLA. We talk about some of the aspirations that you guys are bringing into the course and more. I'm going to drag my good friend Dr. Jeannie Hoffman in to join us in that adventure as well. So until then, go and play with CLA and some of these other things. Explore the readings, have a listen to the interviews that I'm putting up online, and so on. Take care, and thank you very much.